Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, Martial Arts Addict. This is a channel for everyone that just can't get martial arts off their mind. I'm talking about people that are always watching martial arts videos, reading about martial arts, or talking about martial arts before they get up in the morning, whilst they're on their way to work, at work, during their breaks, at lunchtime, on their way home, on the toilet, at the dinner table, and not forgetting that this is all on top of training in a martial art. If that sounds like you, then keep an eye out for my channel because I'm exactly the same. In my first video, I want to discuss a really interesting topic in regards to the samurai of Japan. Now, there have been warrior groups throughout history that have inspired the minds of many martial artists, and the samurai still do this today. There's been books, for example, written by samurai that still today heavily influence business professionals from around the world. Even for people who aren't interested in martial arts, the mention of the word samurai probably does conjure up images of powerful warriors brandishing the iconic sword known as the katana. Now, the samurai was basically a warrior class of people who were born into the status. It wasn't something that you could choose to become. However, we now know that there were non-Japanese people who were given the title of samurai, for example, from Korea and from Europe. However, out of all the non-Japanese to be given the status of a samurai, there is none more fascinating than that of an African man who rose from slavery to become a contender for the position of being the first non-Japanese samurai in history. His name was Yasuke, and I'm going to discuss what we know about him. I'm also going to discuss some theories that I have about Yasuke and how this links to martial arts and combat traditions from the African continent. Now, in this video, I'm also going to make a bold claim that Yasuke was also the first foreign sumo wrestler. Now, not a lot is known about Yasuke. His recorded history appears only between 1579 and 1582. We're not entirely sure from which African country Yasuke came from, and although most historians believe that he came from Mozambique, others argue that he might have been of either Ethiopian, Sudanese, or Nigerian descent. So although we can't be certain as to which country Yasuke came from, there is evidence to support the arguments for all of these. We know, for example, that the arrival of Africans in Japan happened as early as 1546, when 3 Portuguese ships arrived carrying on board a man from Mozambique. In a letter to his colleagues, a Catholic priest wrote about how the Japanese came to see the African man from as far as a distance of 60 miles. Just to emphasize the intense interest and fascination the Japanese had. Another Jesuit priest called Neki Soldo Organtino, who came to Japan in 1570, wrote in a letter how the Japanese would pay money to see slaves from Ethiopia, and how he believed that anyone could make money by showing African people. In fact, in another letter, he suggested that Jesuits who found themselves in financial difficulty should bring African people with them. Based on that, I think that we can conclude that Yasuke was a slave. We also know that he came to Japan in 1579 in the service of Alessandro Valignano, an Italian Jesuit missionary who in 1573 was appointed by the Society of Jesus to supervise the entire Jesuit mission in Asia. Now, Alessandro spent time in Goa and Macau, but his greatest contribution to the promotion and spread of Christianity was in Japan. Now, Alessandro Valignano must have known the advantage that having an African slave in his service would bring, especially in regards to what Neki Soldo Organtino had said. He must have known that Yasuke would attract attention and could even bring in money to help finance Alessandro's Jesuit mission. However, he probably didn't anticipate just how much of an attraction Yasuke would have on the Japanese. Now, I just want to quickly add some information in at this point. Japan had used a societal hierarchy, and at the top was the emperor, but this seemed to be merely a symbolic purpose. The actual leadership was placed in the hands of the shogun, which was a military leader. Now, under the shogun were a group of military leaders known as the daimyo, and during a period known as the Sengoku period, or the period of the warring state, the country was engaged in a near constant period of civil war. There were various warlords and different clans engaging in warfare for the control of Japan. Now, one of the most prominent warlords during this period was the daimyo named Oda Nobunaga, who in 1573 overthrew the ruling shogun and dissolved the Ashigaka shogunate. Now, Oda Nobunaga was not only an innovative military tactician, he was also an extremely brutal and ruthless warlord who did not spare his enemies, including women and children. But despite this, Oda Nobunaga is considered to be one of the three great unifiers of Japan, along with his two retainers, Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu. So, what does this all have to do with Yasuke? Well, Alessandro went to Kyoto in 1581 to meet with Oda Nobunaga. Accompanying him was Yasuke. We know this because the meeting is recorded in the Shincho Koki, a biography of Oda Nobunaga written by a samurai called Ota Gayuichi. Now, the meeting was also recorded in a letter written by a Jesuit priest called Louis Froise. And from these sources, we know that when Yasuke arrived in Kyoto, word of his presence caused people to flock just to get a glimpse of him. The account says that the people were so desperate to see him that buildings fell down, people climbed upon each other, threw stones at each other, and some died because of their intense interest and efforts to see Yasuke. In fact, Yasuke had to escape through the crowds on horseback. Now, why were the people so desperate to see him? Well, firstly, many spiritual figures in Japan, such as the Buddha, are depicted as being black. So it's possible that a dark-skinned man like Yasuke could have made the people think that he had a divine-like quality. Secondly, Yasuke, by the standard back in that era of Japan, cast an imposing figure. It's recorded that he stood at 6'2", which was far taller than the average Japanese man. And he was also powerfully built and looked like a man of great strength. And in fact, Yasuke was described as being around the age of 26 or 27 years old and having greater strength than 10 powerful men. Now, I'm not entirely sure as to why the conclusion was made regarding Yasuke's strength, but I do have my own theory on this, which I'll come to later. Now, Yasuke's size, height and strength would have made him look like a formidable adversary, or even better, a powerful ally. When Yasuke was brought to Oda Nobunaga, he saw the potential of an ally. And when he first saw the man, Oda Nobunaga refused to believe that Yasuke's skin colour was real and ordered him to be scrubbed, which I can imagine must have been very demeaning for Yasuke. However, it seems that Oda Nobunaga was impressed with Yasuke that he decided to keep him. Not only that, he actually gave him the Japanese name Yasuke. Now, we don't know what his name was before that point, but some sources say that Yasuke could be a Japanese corruption of the name Isaac. Now, in fact, Yishak or Yisake are Ethiopian names, referring to the name Isaac from the Bible. Christianity became the state religion of the Kingdom of Aksum, which was a kingdom centered in northern Ethiopia, somewhere around 330 AD. So it's a possibility that Yasuke could have originally come from Ethiopia. Then again, some records indicate the presence of Islam in parts of Nigeria as early as the 14th century, and in Sudan even earlier than that. Now, Isaac is also an Islamic name that appears in the Quran and is often pronounced Ishak. So it's possible that Yasuke, if his name was Japanese pronunciation of the name Isaac, could have been from any one of the countries in Africa that had adopted Christianity or Islam. Now, in regards to the statement that Yasuke was stronger than 10 powerful men, what could this have possibly been based on? Now, you have to consider who were the powerful men that the Japanese would be comparing Yasuke to. Now, obviously, they're the people who were powerful in military terms, such as the shogun and daimyo, etc. But I don't think that this would be what they're referring to. It's more probable that the reference was in regards to physical strength. Now, Japan has always had a love for sumo wrestling, and it's highly likely that it was these wrestlers that Yasuke was being compared to. We already know that Yasuke was bigger and more powerful looking than what the Japanese were used to, but I wouldn't blame you for being surprised about that, considering the size of some of the top sumo wrestlers that you've seen in the media. However, recently, the Chaddy YouTube channel posted a video regarding sumo wrestlers, and he argues that they weren't always big fat guys. He claims that his findings suggest that they were in fact pretty muscular guys. I mean, he does accept that some of them might have had a bit of a belly, but that when you consider that sumo became a samurai art, it wouldn't benefit men that fight in battles to be of a size that might impede their activity in combat. And now by that, I think that Chadi does recognise that the large wrestlers of today are capable of being great combatants in sumo, but that it wouldn't necessarily aid them in combat that would be prolonged, like in a battle of warfare that might need agility and speed. So the sumo wrestlers of the time when Yasuke was in the court of Oda Nobunaga might have been muscular and athletic, but not as tall and as imposing as Yasuke himself. But that's not always what is needed in wrestling. Quite often in grappling arts, the stress can be on the perfection of technique overcoming strength. And this can be true for sumo as well. The Czech sumo wrestler Takano Yama often beat much larger opponents using recognizable techniques. As you can see, the techniques he uses in these video clips against larger and heavier opponents are similar to those used in judo. So the Japanese wrestlers would have still been able to be a match for Yasuke. That is, unless Yasuke himself had some knowledge of wrestling. Now, if there's one thing that can't be denied, that is that most African countries have a culture of wrestling that goes way back into their history. I mean, due to the frequency that it features in their art, it's fair to argue that wrestling was extremely popular with the ancient Egyptians. Many of the scenes, it appears that Egyptians would often wrestle against foreigners, and in particular, a group of people known as the Nubians. Now, these were people of ancient African civilization that lived in an area called Nubia. If I tell you where Nubia is, it was it's now part of southern Egypt and northern Sudan. Now, if you look at the pictures and statues of the ancient Nubians, you see that they are dark-skinned people with the features that you'd associate with people of African heritage. Now, a wall painting from the tomb of an Egyptian officer from around 1410 BC shows the earliest portrayal of Nubian wrestlers. The picture shows 5 men marching together, and one of them is carrying a banner with 2 men wrestling. The Nubians in the painting are also carrying sticks, and these were also known to be used in competitive combat. So the fact that both the reference of stick fighting and wrestling are depicted together could imply that the same people participated in both wrestling and stick fighting matches. So that is evidence of combat traditions of wrestling and combat with weaponry in African ancient history. This tradition has carried on into modern times. So the Nuba people of southern Kordofan, which is a province in Sudan, share a similarity with the Nubians in the importance that they placed onto wrestling. An anthropological survey published in 1969 noted that the Nuba people's love of wrestling by saying it's comparable to what cricket is to the English. Now, bearing in mind that some argue that Yasuke could possibly have been of Sudanese origin, it doesn't seem unlikely that he might have had a knowledge of wrestling. So another group of people from South Sudan who have a long history and tradition of wrestling are the Dinka people. Now, the Dinka are a very tall group of people, and this again could be another possibility of Yasuke's heritage. Now, wrestling also has an extremely important place in many West African cultures, each with their own rules and cultural practices. The Senegalese have a wrestling tradition that dates back to the 14th century. This tradition has endured till today, where wrestling has become the national sport of Senegal. There's actually 2 versions of the sport, one of which allows the opponents to strike as well as wrestle. So it's possible that Yasuke could have had training in the cultural practice of wrestling, and that this would have given Yasuke some success in several bouts of sumo. So successful, in fact, that the description of him being stronger than 10 powerful men could be based on his skill in sumo and the fact that he was able to beat several opponents. Is there any evidence to support this? Well, I think there is. I've read that Oda Nobunaga loved sumo and was so devoted to it that he would hold sumo wrestling tournaments every year. It's also been said that he had some influence on the sport. such as favouring the use of a circular ring called the doyo for the sumo wrestlers to compete in, which is used in competition today. Another possible piece of evidence is in a painting called the Sumo Yurakuzu Byobu, which can roughly be translated as the fold and scream of the sumo game or sumo show. Now, in their book, Yasuke, the true story of the legendary African samurai, Thomas Lockley and Jeff Girard explain that this painting is from 1640, around 60 years after Yasuke and Oda Nobunaga's first meeting. In the painting, we see an outdoor sumo match being adjudicated, as some believe, by Oda Nobunaga. In the contest, we can see that one of the wrestlers is not only different to his opponents, but is also dissimilar to everyone else in the painting. And that one sumo wrestler has a darker skin complexion, and his hair also appears to be different. Now, the argument is that this is a depiction of a black man competing in a sumo wrestling contest, and that this could be Yasuke. Now, the artist of the screen is not known, but it could be possible that this is a recollection of the artist's memory from that first meeting between Oda Nobunaga and Yasuke. Now, when looking at the picture, some might argue that the features painted on the dark-skinned man don't resemble those of a person of African origin. However, I get the feeling that the artist might have possibly wanted to exaggerate the fact that Yasuke was a foreigner, so he gave him the features resembling a type of demon or a long-nosed goblin. And in fact, during the period of Oda Nobunaga, this was how European people were viewed. So it could be that the artist placed this image onto Yasuke's features. Now, if that is the case, Yasuke did prove his worth to Oda Nobunaga by taking on a group of sumo wrestlers in one-to-one combat, then not only is Yasuke the first foreign samurai, but I think that I could make the claim that he was the first foreign sumo wrestler. Now, there might be an argument that people of Chinese or Korean heritage would have competed in sumo before Yasuke, but if that's the case, I'll say that Yasuke definitely participated in sumo before anyone from Europe or the western side of the hemisphere. Now, whatever the case, Oda Nobunaga must have seen some strategic advantage of having Yasuke on his side that he bought Yasuke from Alessandro. However, he didn't buy Yasuke as a slave. What's important is that in the translation of the Shinchokoki that I have read, Yasuke is described as a black priest of Christianity, brought to Oda Nobunaga by the Portuguese missionaries. He's not actually described as a slave. And this tells us that Yasuke might have been wearing the attire of a priest, or at the very least, was not dressed in a way that made the loss of his freedom too obvious. I think that one of the reasons for this is that Alessandro wanted his missionaries to kind of embrace Japanese culture so that they could go about their religious duties without causing too much of a cultural clash. Maybe having Yasuke dress up in Portuguese attire made Alessandro believe that it would have less of a negative impact on the Japanese. Now, at that first meeting, Oda Nobunaga's nephew apparently gave Yasuke a sum of money. Around 3 months after that initial meeting, Yasuke came into the service of Oda Nobunaga as, what some argue, under the status of the warrior class of Japan. Oda Nobunaga conferred upon Yasuke the status of a samurai. Yasuke is also mentioned in an unpublished prototype of the Shinchokoki that is held in the archives of the Sonkai-kaku Bunko collection. According to this text, Oda Nobunaga gave Yasuke his own residence and a short ceremonial katana. In addition, he assigned Yasuke the duty of being his weapons bearer, and that was a position that gave Yasuke the privilege of having a lot of close contact with Oda Nobunaga, including dining at his dinner table. Now, unfortunately, there's one piece of information that is missing that would definitely verify Yasuke's position as a samurai, and that is the wearing of daisho, or the double swords. Now, the samurai, although renowned for their katana, actually wore two swords in order to display their status as a samurai. The term daisho can be translated as meaning big and small. This is because a samurai carried the katana, most of us are accustomed to, and a shorter sword called wakizashi. Now, there's no record of Yasuke being given two swords. However, I think that it's important to note that the mention of Yasuke being given a sword at all is not mentioned in the Shincho Koki. So, although it's mentioned in the earlier unpublished version, the description of a short sword being awarded, most probably a wakizashi, could actually demonstrate the reluctance for the author to mention the right for Yasuke to bear the daisho. Firstly, suggesting that it was only one short sword that was given, to finally removing this altogether. Now, as well as being given a residence as well. So this shows that there was some type of political sensitivity regarding Yasuke and Oda Nobunaga's relationship. Now, in regards to the use of a sword, I've already mentioned information regarding the Nubians during the times of ancient Egypt being adept in the art of stick fighting as well as wrestling. Now, stick fighting is still practiced in various parts of Africa today. The most famous styles are practiced in South Africa, called Donga and Guni stick fighting. I'd say that if you're adept at fighting with sticks, translating that skill to swords wouldn't be that difficult. If you look at Filipino martial arts, such as Kali, Arnis and Eskrima, they usually practice using sticks. However, although the training utilises sticks, these are actually supposed to represent bladed weapons, including swords. So there's no reason to believe that this could have once been the case in Africa. Now, I'll be honest with you, when it came to bladed weapons in Africa, I was ignorant to believe that this would only be in regards to spears. I know that ancient Egyptians had bladed weapons that could be classed as swords, but up until recently, I didn't associate this with the rest of Africa, not in ancient times anyway. But when I did some research into this, I was actually shocked about how wrong I was. In Ethiopia and Eritrea, there is a sword known as the shotel. According to George Cameron Stone, in his The Glossary of the Construction, Decoration and Use of Arms and Armour, the shotel, the curved swords, date back to as early as the 5th and 10th century BC. The curved shape possibly could be to give the bearer the ability to stab around the opponent's shield. In Nigeria, the Yoruba people used the ida, which was a type of long sword that looked a bit like a gladius, the swords used by ancient Roman foot soldiers. I'm not sure as to the age of the ida, but I read that the Yoruba people of West Africa were very skilled blacksmiths, and that the smelting and forging of iron existed in West Africa from as early as the 6th century BC. This is something that I'm going to investigate further, and I'll let you know what I find out about this. The bottom line is, there is evidence for swords in Africa dating back to ancient times. These still might have been prominent during the time of Yasuke. It could be that stick fighting is a method of practicing how to fight with swords. Unfortunately, due to the history of slavery and colonial rule, a lot of the ancient history of Africa has become lost, and unfortunately, we kind of lazily begin the history with slavery, when in fact the African continent has a deep ancient history of vast and wealthy kingdoms protected by warriors who were versed in the use of wrestling and weaponry, including swordsmanship. So, combat with weapons such as swords, spears, and archery might not have been such a stranger to Yasuke. In fact, he may have been pretty good at using them. Unfortunately for Yasuke, his service under Nobunaga didn't last long. In 1582, Akechi Mitsuhide, one of Nobunaga's generals, rebelled against Nobunaga in the Honji incident in Kyoto. Oda Nobunaga was forced to commit seppuku. Now, this was a form of ritual suicide by disembowelment. Yasuke went to serve under Oda Nobutada, the eldest son and heir of Nobunaga, who was trying to rally forces. Yasuke fought alongside the Oda forces, but was eventually captured. Oda Nobutada faced the same fate as his dad, being forced to commit seppuku. However, it's not actually known as to what fate befell Yasuke. According to some sources, Akechi viewed Yasuke as not only foreign, but nothing more than an animal. Therefore, Akechi didn't feel that Yasuke deserved the same fate that was expected of a samurai. In a way, seppuku was viewed as being a method to regain your honor, basically bringing around an honorable death. I guess that such a practice would have been alien to many non-Japanese at that time, not only just Yasuke. So such a death, according to samurai law and code, would have been seen as above him. So apparently Yasuke was sent back to the welcoming arms of Alessandro, the Jesuit priest who had originally brought him to Japan. Whether this is actually true is debatable. I mean, we can't say for sure what became of Yasuke, as there's no written information regarding him after this point. Now, I hope it's true that Yasuke was taken to the Jesuit missionaries and welcomed back by them, although I kind of doubt that this is the case. But, you know, we might never know. In this video, I really wanted to present Yasuke in order to give a brief glimpse of the historical facts relating to ancient combat traditions in the African continent, including the existence of swords. I also wanted to use this information to suggest as to why Yasuke was seen as having the strength of 10 powerful men. Some argue that Yasuke, although he was in the service of Oda Nobunaga, they say he was never given the status of a samurai. The one important problem that supports that argument is that there is no mention that Yasuke was given the right to carry the daisho, or the paired swords. But I hope my argument that the acquiring of a short sword from Oda Nobunaga, recorded in an earlier unpublished version of the chronicles Shinchokoki, and then removed completely from the final draft, suggests that there was some sensitivity, possibly political, in recording this information. Almost like saying, I'll just mention that he received a short ceremonial sword. Actually, I won't mention it at all. Based on my opinion, I would support the argument that not only was Yasuke the first foreign samurai, he was also the first foreign sumo wrestler. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and please let me apologise for any mistakes of pronunciations that I made. And also, I do suffer from stuttering, so I'm really happy that you could all bear with me. In regards to Yasuke, although we can't say for sure from which country he came from, or of what became of him, I think it's an amazing story about an amazing man who, despite the overwhelming challenges and hardships against him, was able to overcome these to become a member of one of the most respected groups of warriors in history.